So how is everyone? We're doing good.
Yes.
Any questions about the inner work? Any blockages? Anything that you would like to discuss?
Yes,
Okay.
I will try to speak
Okay.
slowly English. I, as I said, I had a strong experience with that.
Hmm.
I lost two very close friends, and it was for me important to give serenity for people at the ceremony. And I observe myself in that moment when we lose someone that we like very much. Some people are in despair, other not so much, and so less people in serenity. And I was thinking what when I went out the ceremonial, I was thinking about what I want to my life and how I can help others, and what influences, external influences I can choose for my life um, with people. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I don't want some influences, and I have the right to refuse this influence or not. I think yes. What do you think, Allan?
Um, this was a big issue of my ex-wife's. She didn't really have a magnetic center, but the first 10 years that I was involved in the Gurdjieff teachings and work, she was sort of shadowing me. And she always said it's not only important to surround ourselves by good influences, but to stay away from bad influences. And this holds up to a point. We are energetic beings. When we hang around people, it's like we can pick up what's going on with them. If we try to sort of get into rapport with them, there will be disturbances within our energy fields and things like that. And I was just talking briefly to Brian, who went to all these beautiful national state parks in the last 2 weeks camping, and the energy that comes from being in nature is wonderful. Mr. Gurdjieff said that the impressions that we receive, we can actually receive higher impressions. And part of that is by going to those scenic places, getting away from a lot of negative, discordant energies. But again, this is to a point. It was his German translator, her name escapes me right now, who she ended up in New York State. She set up the New York State Artisans Festival, something like that, Louise Gephardt Marsh. And at one point, Mr. Gurdjieff was writing Beelzebub tales in this really noisy, fracassy, drinking people in a bar. And she said, Mr. Gurdjieff, with the priory, there was like 100 acres of forest there. Why weren't you sitting where you were surrounded by nature, where you had that tranquility, where you had those higher vibrations that you can find in the plants and the rocks and the trees? And he said that he wanted to experience a certain degree of, pity's the wrong word, I forget the exact word he used. He wanted to put himself where people were at their lowest in order to trigger his conscience and his feeling to try to help them rise up, so to speak, through his writings, not by being there at that moment, but he did it to remind himself of where humanity is really centered and how he was really trying to help raise the vibration of certain people. So a bit of both. I think it's so important to surround ourselves with good vibrations, with good energy. The best energy I've ever found has come from nature. If you go into pure, unadulterated nature, and the trees and the earth and the rocks and even the sky, there's this wonderful clarity of energy in nature, in certain natural spots. And Mr. Gurdjieff did talk about the fact that we can't change the air we breathe. We can't change the food we eat. Those come in at a specific level. Food comes in at DO 768 and continues, that transformational process up through the food octave. Air comes in at DO 192, but we can put ourselves in places where we receive higher impressions. So at some point, we also have to act like cocoons, and we've got to stay away from the discordancy, from the negative energy, from the loud engines and motors and city streets, and really try to conserve our energy, try to work with our energy. But there are other times when we should see how well we've done and go back into those situations. But, the whole issue of death as well. Mr. Gurdjieff wrote, and this he wrote as himself, not as Beelzebub. It's in the last chapter from the author in Beelzebub Tales, where he said that if he could do anything, he would implant an organ within us that made us aware of our death. During the last meeting, I said that, I actually know Ave Maria, the prayer in Portuguese. And there's a part of it, now and in the hour of our death. That's what really draws me to that prayer. You say it and you get to the line, now and in the hour of our death. And it kind of makes us, the now makes us aware of being here in this immediate moment, in the present moment, and then in the hour of our death makes us cognizant of the fact that we are going to die. It makes us realize that we could die at any moment, we could die at any time, and there is no tomorrow. We really have to work today. And a lot of people, one of the problems with funerals is they don't want to confront their own mortality. A funeral makes us aware that we are going to die. Mr. Gurdjieff said it's very easy to imagine, the person walking down the street dying or someone we know dying, but it becomes much more difficult to become aware of our own death, to use this awareness of our mortality and that we don't have forever to work on ourselves. And so it really also depends on the level of a person's being. Most people are at a certain level, and I believe grief and the energy that fuels grief, at least in my experience, is one of those higher hydrogens. But if you are a lawnmower and you put diesel fuel in the lawnmower, it just causes great big explosions and whatever. You need to put diesel fuel in, or jet fuel, jet airplane fuel in a jet. And so most people, they're at a lower level. They are man number 1, 2, or 3. And this high energy comes in and they're just not able to deal with it properly, and it explodes and brings them down and causes all sorts of darkness. But when you begin to raise the level of your being, when you begin to move up and you can actually feed on these higher energies, then you can use it for something different. You can use it for sort of a more expansive consciousness, a more expansive awareness. But for most people, that's not possible because of the low level of their being. It just explodes down, and a lot of people go into denial. They're really sad at the loss of the person, but they don't want to confront the idea that they themselves are going to die. And so this is a very important recognition. It's a very important meditation. I was actually talking about this with my Tuesday night group, that in India there are a group of monks who, people get put in the Ganges River at death, and they get the skulls, and they cut the skulls in such a way that the skull becomes their plate where they feed from. And then they live in the crematorium grounds. And they do this to live in constant reminder of their own mortality and in constant reminder of their death. So I think it's a little morbid. I think it's gone a little bit to the extreme, but it comes from that same impulse to realize that all we have is this moment right here and now. We don't know if we're going to go to the kitchen after this meeting ends, get a sandwich and choke on it. We don't know if we're going to walk out onto the street and get hit by a car. We have no idea when death will come for us. All we can know is that it will come for us, and we should use this recognition to work on ourselves here and now in this moment. Hisham, how are you? How are things in Morocco?
Yes, everything fine, thank you.
Good. I should say, I don't know if part of the problem comes from, as I said earlier, if you look up at the top of our screen and you move your cursor, there's a little green E. And maybe this is the affecting with Facebook and having had the problems with that we were doing before. But today I'm going to continue with the part 2 of the misuse of C12, understanding the connection with sexual energy, the highest energy that's naturally produced by the human body. So normal people produce it, and I believe that the way and only way that we can ensure that we are properly using C12 is to develop the sensory awareness of our body, to become aware of our body as one organic whole, to become aware of the sensation of self, to become aware of our body from the bottom of our feet to the top of our head, front to back, side to side. So whenever we do inner work, let me just pull this up. We're doing it for ourselves, for humanity, and for the earth. So Mr. Gurdjieff's words, just expand my screen slightly. I wish to be, I can be, I have the right to be, I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. So for the sensation of self, for the body, it helps if we can relax our body. And conscious relaxation during the day should start from the head down to the bottom of the feet. So just become aware of the crown of your head and just relax the crown of your head in whatever way you can. And then move down to your forehead, relaxing your forehead. There's doing and not doing. And it is just as important to not do as it is to do. A lot of people are stuck in doing. They've got to be doing all the time. In terms of relaxation, when we relax our forehead, a part of that is just letting go and not doing, just allowing our forehead to relax. Doing is tensing our forehead, and not doing is just allowing this relaxation to enter our forehead. So relax our eyebrows. Again, not doing. Relaxing the eyes. Most people aren't even aware that there's a muscle in the center of the nose called the nasalis muscle. And not only are they not really aware of that, they're not even aware that they can relax that. They can let go from deep within that muscle. Then relax the muscles connected to your cheekbones, your cheeks, your mouth, your lips, your chin, your jaw. Moving in, relaxing your tongue. Moving down, relaxing the inside of your throat, and then moving out to the outside of your throat, relaxing all of those surface muscles. Then moving back and relaxing the tiny muscles in the neck closest to the vertebrae in the neck, and then relaxing the larger muscles that flow from the skull down to the shoulders and down to the shoulder blades. And then moving down and relaxing the shoulders, relaxing our upper arms, our elbows, trying to let go within all. There's at least 25 muscles in our lower arms. Try to relax them all. Try to relax the outer muscles. Try to relax the inner muscles in the lower arms. Try to relax the inward muscles. And just as an aside here, as we are relaxing the body, there's a degree of physical identification, the misuse of C12 involved in muscular tension. So as we relax the body, this physical form of identification, we begin to slowly erase. So moving down into our hands, relax the top of our hands, the palms of our hands, the muscles in our hands, relax our fingers. And then just go back to our arms, hands, and fingers and just relax them a little deeper. Just relaxing our arms, hands, and fingers a little deeper. And then move to the chest and relax the various muscles in the chest, the pectoral major and minor muscles, the intercostal muscles that are between our ribs, and even relax our heart muscle. And then move down to the abdominal muscles. And the abdominal muscles are really twin pairs of muscles. And it's not a six-pack, it's really an eight-pack. One pair is sort of half under the ribs, half exposed, then on top of the solar plexus, then above the belly button, and then below the belly button. And then move deeper inwards to relax the stomach, to relax our duodenum, our large and small intestines. J.G. Bennett says that the plant self, the part of ourselves that still exists and feed like the plants feed, is located behind the navel. And it's very important to relax this area, to allow the navel, the intestines to just relax deeper and deeper. Then move down into your pelvis and relax your pelvis. Even try to relax your reproductive organs. And then move to the upper back, shoulder blades, and relax the various muscles there. Relaxing the middle back, the lower back, relaxing your hips and buttocks, relaxing your upper legs, your knees, your lower legs. And again, relax your shins, relax your calves. You have a lot of muscles in your lower legs. And then move down into your feet, relaxing your heels, relaxing the top and bottom of your feet, relaxing the toes in your feet, just relaxing your feet deeper and deeper. And then let's move up again to the head. And this time I want you to move in a little deeper and focus on relaxing the bones in your head. So the parietal bone at the very top of the head, the temporal bones at the side, the occipital bone at the back, the frontal bone at the front. Then relax the facial bones with your upper teeth. Relax the jawbone with your lower teeth. And then move into your spine and just relax your spine. Relax your collarbone, relax your shoulder bones, Relax the bones in your upper arms, lower arms, hands and fingers, just relaxing those bones deeper and deeper. Then relax your rib cage, your breastbone, and then relax your spine down to your pelvic bone, relaxing your pelvic bone, your upper legs, the bone, lower legs, relaxing the various bones in your feet. And then again, let's just do this quickly, move up to the head. And as best you can, even if you just have to imagine it, imagine relaxing the marrow in the bones, in your head. And then moving down and relaxing the marrow in your spine, relaxing the marrow in your shoulder blades, your rib cage, your breastbone, relaxing the marrow in your pelvic bones, relaxing the marrow in your thigh bones, your bones in your lower legs, the bones in your feet. Try as best you can to imagine relaxing the marrow in all of your bones. Try to stop any tension in the body, to stop allowing the physical self and the body to engage in its own form of identification, which is usually expressed through tension. You know, sometimes for me, I hold a lot of tension in my jaw. And so focusing on relaxing my jaw is important. Other people in their shoulders, other people in their hands. So just scan your body. Just try to find out if there's still any residual tension and relax your body. Let go of that physical form of identification. And then as you breathe in to the top of your head, and as you breathe out, breathe a wave of relaxation down your body to the bottom of your feet. Breathing into the top of your head and just relaxing your muscles as you breathe out down to the bottom of your feet, and then breathe in again. And as you breathe out, just imagine relaxing the bones all the way down to the bottom of your feet. And as you breathe in again, imagine relaxing the marrow all the way down to the bottom of your feet. Let go of all physical tension. Let go of all physical identification. This is one of the forms of the misuse of C12 in holding on to this tension within the body. So just relax the body. And it's also a requirement for doing inner work to let go of the misuse of this energy at the unconscious, subconscious level by consciously relaxing our body. And then let's do Mr. Gurdjieff's exercise, the filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, just begin filling your body with sensation. Right now, just start with the soles of your feet, the bottom of your feet, and then fill with sensation for your whole feet. And then move up to your ankles, filling with sensation slowly through the lower legs, the middle part of the lower legs, up to your knees, up through the lower part of your upper legs, the middle part, up to your hips. And with your hips, allow your hands to join this process, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet up through your hands and hips, up through your lower arms, lower torso, to your elbows, your middle torso, so your solar plexus, middle back, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet, slowly up through your upper arms, your chest, your upper back, all the way up to your shoulders, sensing your whole body from the bottom of your feet to your shoulders, and then moving the sensation up through the lower part of your neck, the middle part to the top of your neck, and then into your head. So you're on level with your jaw, level with your nose, level with your eyes, filling with sensation all the way to the top of your head. Sensing your whole body, aware of your whole body from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head. Aware of your body from front to back, from side to side, from inside to out, from outside to in. Aware of the sensation of self, aware of the organic wholeness of your body, aware of your body as one organic whole. And if you're able to do this, if you're able to maintain this awareness of your whole body, from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head, your whole body in an instant, in this moment, you are actually using C12 in its lawful fashion. In this moment of the sensation of self, you are not misusing it. And the only way you can be certain you are not misusing C12 is when you are using it lawfully to sense your body. The higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. C12 meets with So 48 to develop into Law 24. This mindful awareness of our whole body, this sensation of self, this awareness of our physical self is fueled by Law 24. Even becoming aware of the baby finger in our right hand requires Law 24. Any mindful sensation involves Law 24, and the fullest expression of this is the sensation of self, the awareness of our whole body as one organic whole. This is something we should be striving to achieve wherever we are. We should be striving to do this when we are walking down the street, when we are sitting, when we are eating. It is the most basic and preliminary mindfulness exercise, self-sensing, to use the Gurdjieffian term, this awareness of our body. Because when we do this, our body is not misusing that energy. And this is also because it's part of the octave of food. And this is the only part, octave that's fully developed in the normal human. This is where it is easiest to begin our work, sensing the body. So try to hold on to the sensation of self. Try to maintain the sensation of self. And I'm just going to grab my little bell. And as I'm going to be reading things today, I'm going to be dinging the bell actually. But before I do, let's just finish with the collected state exercise. As the earth is surrounded by an atmosphere, so too are we surrounded by an atmosphere. Imagine collecting your atmosphere, drawing it in, keeping it tranquil, keeping it still. Our atmosphere is usually in a very dispersed state, and it's very important to learn how to collect our atmosphere, keep it around us. At first, we can only do this when we are alone or sitting very quietly, but it is something that we should work on, trying to do it when we walk down the street, when we're in social gatherings, to keep our atmosphere collected, calm, still around us. So become aware of your atmosphere, collect it. Keep your mind, your thoughts still. Keep your sensations, your body still. Keep your feelings still. Try to become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. Mr. Gurdjieff said that we should collect it to about a meter, meter and a half around us, so 4 to 6 feet. Try to become aware of the boundary of our atmosphere. Keep it still. And in a moment, I'm going to count to 3. And when I get to 3, breathe the atmosphere in. 1, 2, 3. Breathe the atmosphere in. And as you breathe out, imagine that something remains, that something settles within us, that those emanations coalesce, that they help to form our Kesdjan body. And then silently in your mind, repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And I'm just, as I said, I'm just going to go get my little Tibetan bell. So try to use the sound to come back to the sensation of self. So whenever I do the bell for the rest of this meeting, use it as an opportunity to try your best to develop the full and complete awareness of your physical body. This is a very important step in the work. Mr. Gurdjieff once asked the small group that was meeting in St. Petersburg, what's the most important realization you should have? And it turned out it was that they were not present. People are not physically in their bodies when they are talking to people. They are not aware of the sensation of self when they are walking down the street, when they are watching a movie, when they are talking. And if we can bring ourselves back to this awareness and this full awareness of the sensation of self in this moment, we are properly using C12. And so in this moment, when we are aware of our physical body, when we are aware of the sensation of self, that organic wholeness, we are not misusing C12, but using it lawfully. It's unfortunate that our thoughts drag us away and we get enamored in all sorts of things that then dissipate the energy that should be lawfully used to develop the sensation of self. And so this is what I'm going to talk about today. And I started it before. I'm just going to share 2 weeks ago, I had problems last week with technology. But, Mr. Gurdjieff pointed out, and he emphasized the point of Thomas Edison's phonograph. And he used this understanding of the phonograph and how stuff is impressed on these wax cylinders to create sounds. And he says that the impressions that we receive, both from the outside world and the impressions that come from within us, so our thoughts and imaginations also leave impressions behind within ourselves, as well as the words we hear, the pictures we see, everything that comes in through our eyes, ears, nose, mouth, they all leave impressions. So the phonograph, and he used the word crystallizations. He never used the word impressions in Beelzebub Tales. There he uses the word crystallizations. And he talks about how we have to learn how to decrystallize impressions that were previously crystallized within us. So part of the problem with humanity is that at the level of essence, most people are deformed beings. They have an essence. Their essence sort of exists, but at a very deformed level. And he actually used that word deformed. It's like they have these deformed crystallizations within them. So the misuse of C12 leads to abnormal growth within us. I've used it, this is roughly the way we could visualize it. In the state of waking sleep, the diagram on the left is how most people are. And the fact that these abnormal crystallizations occur, let me just focus in on that these abnormal crystallizations occur in a normal person. Me12 or Me48 doesn't have the sufficient energy it requires to develop properly. And we can see over here in the middle, the second diagram on the right, this is the proper development of Me12. DOE comes in at DOE 48. It doesn't have the energy to properly continue it has to move up, as we can see on the right. So instead, they steal and misuse the energy of the physical body, of the octave of food, C12. And so we create these abnormal crystallizations, these abnormal impressions within ourselves that must be decrystallized. Fortunately, one way to decrystallize them is not to continue to grow them. He said that, you know, ultimately it's like pouring from the empty to the void. If they are not reinforced, if they are not reanimated over and over again, they will disappear on their own. The proper way to do things is to be aware of receiving impressions with the head brain while sensing the body with the physical brain and allowing something to grow between them. Something that I mentioned in the first meeting on this topic. So this is what happens. This is the normal person there on the left. This is towards the right. That the right is the full expression of a man number 4. So there's a man number 4 at Do, a man number 4 at Mi, a man number 4 at Re, the full octave of man number 4. This would be a man number 4 at C, at the moment before they can transform and begin to work at the low level of being a man number 5. So a man number 4 has decrystallized the abnormal crystallizations that are inherent in our society and in our education, and then they've begun to crystallize in the proper form and sequence: head, body, feelings, as I've talked about. Oops. Let me just bring yourself back to your body as best as you can. The problem of sex. There is one important problem in children's education which is never thought about or spoken about correctly. A strange feature of modern education that, in relation to sex, children grow up without guidance. With the result that this whole side is warped and twisted through generations of wrong attitudes. This is the primary cause of many wrong results in life. The sex center plays a very great part in our life. 75% of our thoughts come from the center, and they color all the rest. Aware of your body, sensing your body from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head. And while sensing your body, ponder this. He's talking about a normal person. 75% of their thoughts come from the sex center. They color all the rest. It's frightening. Modern education and modern life create an enormous number of sexual psychopaths. They have no chance at all in the work. Mr. Gurdjieff actually says that the sex center works with hydrogen 12, and it has no opposite. So sex should either make us feel good or not feel anything. The higher centers, the higher energies, in particular, the hydrogen 12, the solar realm, if we're referring to the ray of creation, has no opposites. The binary enters in with world 24, with the essence. Then happiness or love divides into love and anger. Fear or peace divides into peace and fear. Joy divides into joy and despair. And from the world 24 down, we have opposites. And Mr. Gurdjieff says that when the energy of the sexual center is stolen by the emotional center in the form of emotional daydreams and emotional negativity and whatnot, and taken over by the intellectual center, it doesn't properly develop, and it can tap into the negative part of the instinctual center or the negative part of the moving center. I remember when the book 50 Shades of Grey came out, a part of me actually felt a little deflated that it became such a bestseller. There, people are experimenting and combining and linking sexuality, which in and of itself should be very pure, with pain, with hurt, with sadomasochism. And this is where these psychopaths are developed. And there's a lot of people, through their experiences, through what happened to them as teenagers or whatever in sexual experiences, have unfortunately made this link. And Mr. Gurdjieff says that when a person does that, there is no possibility for them to develop. And Ouspensky took this a little too far. Jane Heap tried to join Ouspensky's group in London in the early 1920s, and Ouspensky said, "We don't deal with that type." And he implied that there was no hope for Jane Heap. And Jane Heap then went to Paris, and she became one of Mr. Gurdjieff's star pupils. And the reason Ouspensky turned his nose up at her was because she was a lesbian. And a lot of people in the Gurdjieff teachings think that there is this antipathy against homosexuality, and there is not. It's when it gets linked, and not homosexuality, but when sexuality gets linked with pain, when the two are combined and they sort of form a person's sexual basis, that it becomes problematic. So when pain is introduced to sexuality, that is when psychopaths are created. And they can be heterosexual, they can be homosexual. There is no rule in terms of people who are homosexual, gays, or lesbians developing in this work. The Ladies of the Rope was primarily a lesbian group. There was one non-lesbian member of the Ladies of the Rope. And this is one of Mr. Gurdjieff's famous experiments with transforming people. So Jane Heap, Margaret Anderson, Solita Solano, I can't remember all the names. They were the Ladies of the Rope. And they learned how to work properly with this energy. So let's just try and bring ourselves back to our body. Sex plays a tremendous role in maintaining the mechanicalness of life. Everything that people do is connected with sex. Politics, religion, art, the theater, music is all sex. Do you think people go to the theater or to church to pray or to see some new play? That is only for the sake of appearances. The principal thing in the theater as well as in church is that there will be a lot of women or a lot of men. This is the center of gravity of all gatherings. What do you think brings people to cafes, to restaurants, to various fetes? One thing only, sex. It is the principal motive force of all mechanicalness, all sleep, all hypnosis depends on it. I remember when I was sort of a young man, poetry was very big. It's fallen to the wayside now in the internet age and the age of information technology. And for the men who wanted to be poets, underneath it, if you ask them, and I did ask quite a few, it was because they wanted to get with the ladies. Their poetry was the misuse of the sexual center. They wanted to be seen as erudite and poetic with language. I've also talked to a lot of musicians when they were 14, 15. What was it that you were hoping to achieve? And they were hoping to find girlfriends. And, you know, this underlies so much. I once came up with a thought experiment. You take an iPhone and you reduce the iPhone to its constituent components. You figure out how much those components cost. And then you reappraise the iPhone with, say, a 40% markup. So that reflects, you know, its proper value in the marketplace. And the difference between what it should cost naturally and what it does cost, I called the C12 tax. You know, fashion, the whole fashion world. We are not our physical self. Mr. Gurdjieff said that, you know, women wore jewelry and men wore really fancy clothing to hide their own insignificance. The whole fashion industry is one huge misuse of C12. You know, strutting down the runways like peacocks and painting faces, and we can, you know, we can expand this to all sorts of things. Movies, televisions, most of them are all based on C12. You look at the movies and televisions that come out of North America, and the actors and actresses are abnormally good looking. People don't want to see plain people. They want to fantasize. They want to imagine. They want to run away with their imagination and get caught up in the glamour and what is going on. And this, you know, 75% of our thoughts are fueled by the misuse of C12. It's imagination, daydreaming, identification, the stress and tensions we can hold in our body, focusing on the external dimensions. You know, there are now some gyms around the neighborhood where I work that have windows, big, huge windows, and you can look in there. And the people are there they're looking at the mirrors, they're focusing on their muscles, they're developing their bodies because they want to be like peacocks, not for the sake of developing their bodies, but the whole process is fueled by the misuse of C12. And it extends far beyond the fashion industry. Mr. Gurdjieff said people, I'll get to the quote, people write books and give lectures and do all sorts of things as a result of C12 and misusing it. Question, has free will a place in your teachings? Answer, free will is the function of the real I, of him who we call the master. He who has a master has will. An ordinary man is ruled now by the mind, now by the feeling, now by the body. Very often he obeys orders coming from the automatic apparatus. 1,000 times more often he is ordered about by the sex center, used from the real world. Going to parties, going to social gatherings. We don't go to a lot of church these days, but back in the 1915, when he was talking to Uspensky, you know, he said it was the center of gravity of all gatherings, theater, church, where people get together, parties, festivals, all sorts of things. They're all ruled by that, by wanting to see and be seen. And we've got to learn to use this energy properly, bringing ourselves back to the awareness of our body, back to the sensation of self, back to the awareness of our body as one organic whole, the awareness of our body from the bottom of our feet to the top of our head, aware of our physical body. Now, here is something really interesting. And I actually I forgot to do one thing this morning. Let me just quickly, sorry about this. Okay, I've just got it set up there. Hopefully you were using that as an opportunity to be aware of yourself. Then the other question, is sexual abstinence useful for the work or not? That's a question to Mr. Gurdjieff. It is useful if there is abstinence in all centers. If there is abstinence in one center and full liberty of imagination in the others, then there could be nothing worse. And still more, abstinence can be useful if a man knows what to do with the energy which he saves in this way. If he does not know what to do with it, nothing whatever can be gained by abstinence. Speaking in general, there are only two correct ways of expending sexual energy: normal sexual life and transmutation. All inventions in this sphere are very dangerous. So when we become aware of our body, we are transforming this energy into the awareness of our physical self. There is more to this transmutation, but this is where it begins. Coming back, people have tried abstinence from times beyond memory. Sometimes, very rarely, it has led to something. But in most cases, what is called abstinence is simply exchanging normal sensations for abnormal, because the abnormal are more easily hidden. And as an aside here, Mr. Gurdjieff disliked priests. He disliked celibate priests. But he said that a fat celibate priest was less harmful and less dangerous than a skinny one. The skinny ones became fanatical. They led the sort of reign of terror, during the Inquisition. They didn't do it properly. And so they were just getting involved in being sexually abstinent because it was one of the requirements of the church and one of the requirements of priesthoods. But without properly transforming that energy, without properly understanding that energy, it led to all sorts of deformations in their characters. And he said, never trust a priest. So it has, because the abnormal are more easily hidden. And we're seeing this coming out with the whole, sexual abuse in the church, even though it extends well beyond the church. It's in all Protestant churches as well. It's not limited to the Catholic Church, but that's the one that gets a lot of media attention because they are supposed to be celibate. And people recognize that there's something abnormal with priests taking the vow of celibacy. They don't understand the proper nature of transformation. So the abnormalities are more easily hidden, and try to sense your body. But it is not about this that I wish to speak. You must understand where lies the chief evil and what makes for slavery. It is not in sex itself, but in the abuse of sex. But what the abuse of sex means is again misunderstood. People usually take this to be either excess or perversion. But these are comparatively innocent forms of abuse of sex. And it is necessary to know the human machine very well in order to grasp what abuse of sex in the real meaning of these words is. It means the wrong work of centers in relation to sex. That is, the action of the sex center through other centers, and the action of the other centers through the sex center. Or to be more precise, the functioning of the sex center with energy borrowed from the other centers, and the functioning of the other centers with energy borrowed from the sex center. So going back to this diagram, emotional imagination, negative emotions, creating this abnormal development within ourselves, intellectual imagination, creating this abnormal development. But when the sex center is robbed of this energy, it has to work with a lower, coarser energy. And so the sex center can then link up with the negative part of the instinctual center or the negative part of the moving center, and create those abnormalities where people begin to associate pain with the sexual pleasure, and the two become intertwined. So it becomes very important to realize there are many different ways that this can be abused. Whoops. So just bring yourself back to the sensation of self. Bring yourself back to the organic awareness of your whole body as one. The effort which creates this shock, and he's talking about the second conscious shock, not the first conscious shock. In the transformation, the effort which creates this shock must consist in work on the emotions, in the transformation and transmutation of emotions. This transmutation of the emotions will then help the transmutation of C12 in the human organism. No serious growth, that is, no growth of higher bodies within the organism, is possible without this transmutation. And I just want to step back here just slightly. So the second conscious shock actually involves the octave of air. We have to accumulate the proper energy to be the higher, which then can meet with the lower to allow the octave of air to develop. The exercise that I continually talk about that I got from George Adi, which I call the morning sitting, is one of the ways we begin to develop the octave of air. We begin to develop our emotions by consciously breathing, by bringing that conscious awareness to our breath, by imagining and using the imaginative faculties of the head brain, perhaps to imagine breathing in particles of light and then breathing out a gray foggy waste, by sensing the air as it flows in from our nose, nasal cavity, back of mouth, throat, vocal cords, back out, by sensing the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing, by sensing the body breathing. We are using our physical brain. And finally, as we breathe in, if we can become aware of feeling arising from the breath in our solar plexus, and as we breathe out, we can imagine, or not imagine, become aware of this quality flowing down to our reproductive organs. We are actually drawing these higher particles into our body, which then will be the higher that we need to combine with the lower to allow us to begin to grow in the proper way. So the secret, the real core secret at a certain level of these teachings involves conscious breathing. The breathing in perhaps particles of light, or imagining however you wish the active elements of the air, the breathing out of that gray foggy waste is head brain. When we combine it with the sensation of breathing, the sensation of air flowing in and out, the sensation of the muscles involved in breathing, the sensation of our body breathing, we are then connecting the head brain to the body brain. And when we become aware of that quality of feeling that flows into our solar plexus and then down to our reproductive organs, we are harnessing our feeling brain. And in this one particular exercise, we are seeding ourselves with the higher particles that are necessary for the development of the octave of air, for the transformation and transmutation of our emotions. So if you're going to practice any exercise, that is the exercise you should practice. It's why I renamed it the morning sitting, so that it gives people the idea that it's something they should start their day with. If you do not have those higher particles present within yourself, no transformation and transmutation is possible. And this is the proper form, the proper sequence of doing this. The first conscious shock, self-remembering is sort of the head brain and the body brain, sort of developing a proper sequence. And this is why it's very important to develop the sensation of self, to use C12 lawfully in the awareness and sensation of our body, so that we can begin to properly self-remember. But the second conscious shock involves the transformation and transmutation of the emotions, or the octave of air. So there is a proper form and sequence to doing all of this. So getting back to the quote, and just bring yourself back to your body. No serious growth, that is, no growth of higher bodies within the organism is possible without this transmutation. The idea of this transmutation was known to many ancient teachings, as well as to some comparatively recent ones, such as the alchemy of the Middle Ages. But the alchemists spoke of this transmutation in the allegorical forms of the transformation of base metals into precious ones. In reality, however, they meant the transformation of coarse hydrogens into finer ones in the human organism, chiefly the transformation of Me12. And just coming over here, so chiefly he's speaking of Me12 is this one. Whoops, it's Me12 of the octave of impressions. But whoops, I didn't mean to do that. We've got to do it all in the proper form and sequence. If this transformation is attained, and come back to our bodies, if this transformation is attained, a man can be said to have achieved what he was striving for. And it can also be said that until this transformation is attained, all results attained by man can be lost, because they are not fixed in him in any way. Moreover, they are attained only in the spheres of thought and emotion. Real objective results can be obtained only after the transmutation of Me12 has begun. And it's actually so 12 of the octave of air, of emotions, that allows and gives Me12 the proper vibration. So we've got to properly use C12 in the sensation of self, and then we have to become aware of receiving impressions while holding on to the sensation of self. And then we've got to begin collecting the higher particles within us necessary through the breathing exercises to allow the emotional center to change and to grow and transform, so that when we can achieve So 12 of the octave of air, it has a resonant effect and allows for the transformation and transmutation of C12. So there's this very specific way this is done. Alchemists who spoke of this transmutation began directly with it. They knew nothing, or at least, and this is C12, they began directly with the abstinence. celibacy. They knew nothing, or at least they said nothing about the nature of the first volitional shock, that is self-remembering, the receiving of external impressions, mindfully looking with intent, looking, listening, smelling, tasting with that mindful awareness while sensing our body is the basic form of self-remembering, the basic process of the first conscious shock. And the alchemists of the Middle Ages, and not just them, knew nothing about the nature of this shock, about self-remembering. It is upon this, however, that the whole thing depends. The second volitional shock and transmutation become physically possible only after long practice on the first volitional shock, which consists in self-remembering and in observing the impressions received. On the way of the monk and on the way of the fakir, work on the second shock begins before work on the first shock. So they don't understand the nature, necessity, and importance of self-remembering as a basic step. But as Me 12 is created only as a result of the first shock, work in the absence of other material has of necessity to be concentrated on C12. And it very often gives quite wrong results. Right development on the fourth way must begin with the first volitional shock, that is self-remembering, the awareness of external impressions, receiving them while sensing our body, and then pass on to the second shock at Me 12. And this is through the work on the emotional center. Now, this passage gives us tremendous insight into the misuse of C12 in a negative way. As a hypnotherapist, I have clients come in and see me. And when I put them in the chair, one of the things I try to do during my first session is to have them go back to a good memory before the age of 8. And I phrase it very specifically. I want your subconscious mind to take you back to a moment before the age of 8 when you experienced the equal but opposite feeling of why you came here today. I don't want to, in the first session, take them back to a negative childhood experience, back to a moment when they were broken. So I ask for the equal and opposite feeling. And from that, we can figure out what the feeling is. And I don't like to name the feeling. I like to give the subconscious mind maximum leeway to interpret this however it wants. I may, through the interview process, have an idea of what the feeling is, but 20% of the time I'm wrong and the subconscious highlights something else through highlighting, so to speak, the mirror image. So one way we can really begin to explore and ponder the misuse of C12 is to think of monks, to think of the monastic orders, to think of monasteries. Mount Athos in Greece. This monastery, women are forbidden from going in there. And there's this big problem now in Greece before the Supreme Court because I believe the government now has ownership of the monastery, so they maintain it. And then people are taking the government to court because of the Constitution and the equality of the sexes. And they're saying that women should be allowed there, and the monks are up in arms. But it was built in a very inhospitable, inaccessible place. A Buddhist monastery in Bhutan, way high up. Monasteries, Christian monk, Buddhist monks. When we think about this, what is it that they're doing? We can trace it back to the Buddha, and not just to the Buddha, This is the problem with Eastern spirituality. Eastern spirituality is based on the monastic tradition. And the monastic tradition involves a number of requirements. One, you have to leave your family. Two, you've got to change your name. Three, you generally have to shave your head and wear the saffron monastic robes. And four, you're supposed to go to a monastery in the forest, away from civilization, away from people. And there in the monastery, you get up, you pray, you look at a wall, you meditate, you're mindful. All sorts of outside disturbances disappear. There is no Monday. There is no weekend. Today is like yesterday, which is like tomorrow, which is like 1,000 years ago. And so we can begin to explore the misuse of C12 when we conduct a thought experiment, and the whole monastic life, all of the vows they have to take, all of the daily things they have to engage in are all designed to prevent the misuse of C12. The Buddha actually stated that only a celibate monk can become enlightened. The best that a householder can achieve is to take rebirth into a life where they can become a celibate monk. In that whole monastic tradition, you have to leave your family, you have to renounce your family. In the Christian tradition, they use the Latin word fuga mundi, fleeing the world. You have to deny your mother, your father, your brothers, your sisters. You sever that relationship with them. So obviously, something about being involved in family life, being involved in the world, involves the misuse of C12. You've got to give up your name. People are so identified with their name. I remember when I wrote an article for a university newspaper, over 40 years ago, and the first time I saw my name in print, man, was I proud to see my name in print. But my name doesn't belong to me. It's one of these external things. It was given to me by my parents. It's part of my personality. And people are so identified with their name. They are so identified with their family, with their lineage. You, Ancestry.com, you've just got to look at the depths and the lengths that people go to realize that William the Conqueror was one of their ancestors, and 50% of people in England, William the Conqueror was one of their ancestors. And, it becomes absurd, this form of identification with our family and our family values. And you're a Smith, or you're a Jones, or you're a this, or you're a that. We also can expend a lot of this energy, the misuse, through our families, through the arguments, through the negativity, through the shouting. One way to determine if C12 is present is if the ego is present. If you get angry, and how can they do that to me, and I thought they loved me, and the me at the heart of it, that egocentric aspect of negative emotions identifies those negative emotions as being a product of the misuse of C12. And families can be very combustive, very emotional. People who are wonderful on the outside world come home and dump on their families. And there's a lot of negativity that exists within families. But it's more than that. They have to renounce their families. They have to renounce their name. They have to shave their head. So much of identity and people in haircuts and hairstyles and all of these things, they've got to give up their clothing and, allow their body to be adorned in the simple robes of a monk. The monastic order whether or not it's the Christian monks just wearing whatever it was, whatever they call it, or the Buddhist or Hindu monks wearing the saffron robes. So if we explore and if we think and use this as a thought experiment, how does the monastic life, how do the strictures and rules of the monastic life help to prevent the misuse of C12? And this also leads us, to the awareness that monasteries and temples that are located in cities, there's quite a few here in Toronto, where they open it up to the layperson and they open it up to all sorts of people. Will those monks be able to achieve liberation? Will they be able to stop the misuse of C12? There's a big scandal within certain Buddhist communities of these people who were considered high-level monks who are now being drawn into the Me Too movement and the sexual impropriety. And even the Dalai Lama's equivalent, I forget his name, the head of a full order of Tibetan Buddhism, tremendous amount of Me Too going on there. He would invite young women to his private quarters and tell them to undress. And they would think that it was a spiritual exercise in obedience. And he was just inflamed by desire, and he was misusing C12. Part of what the Buddha said is that they have to flee to monasteries, and the monasteries should be, let me pull this up again, should be in inaccessible areas, hidden away from the outside world, in the middle of forests. They weren't to be on the corner of a busy downtown street. They had to get away, and he called it temptation. I see it as the misuse of C12. They had to flee from their family, give up their name, give up their identity, shave their head, look like everyone else in the monastery. And in doing this, they stopped misusing C12. So if we look at the monastic tradition, if we look at everything that they set up, all of the rules, all of the observances, and not within recent times, but going back, for instance, to what the Buddha taught about it, what the Buddha said, because a lot of outside strains have come in. There's a lot of scandal, for instance, in Thailand, of jet-setting monks with iPhones and $200 sneakers and, all of these things. The Buddha said it has to be isolated, away, not in the world, outside of the world. And the whole process of meditation, of spending your days in mindful awareness, of being quiet, being silent, not doing a lot of talking, all of that prevents the misuse of C12. So using the monastic example, using monks, using the understanding of those people who don't have the understanding of self-remembering and the first conscious shock and all of the things that Mr. Gurdjieff was talking about, gives us this great insight into what is involved in the misuse of C12. Now, Angelica, you make vegan food for Tibetan lamas. Do they have a monastery there? And we've got a few minutes left now.
I cooked for lamas, and the most contemporary lama was here, John Zakienzi. He came with his girlfriend from Bhutan.
Okay.
And it was really a funny guy moment, a different lama, Yeah. He spoke about lots about this misunderstanding sexual energy and all scandals we have now in the world with this no correct use energy. It was a good experience for me.
Okay. Any other questions? Because we've got a few more minutes. I'm going to have to continue this next week because I've got another huge quotation to talk about. Just trying to bring ourselves back to our body. Trying to be aware of light coming in to our eyes, aware of our eyeballs and aware of our eyes receiving all these visual impressions. Becoming aware of our ears and the sound coming into our ears, aware of all of these auditory impressions. Becoming aware of our nose, receiving the olfactory impressions, perhaps our own body scent or the scent around us. Aware of our taste buds, taste in our mouth. Mindfully looking, listening, smelling, and tasting. Trying to do either one or as many of them together, trying to overlap them while sensing the body, while aware of the physical body, while maintaining that sensation of self. This is the first conscious shock. This is the first step up. But in order to do this first conscious shock, we have to develop that sensation of self. We've got to develop the awareness of our body. Everyone on the planet has C12, even if it's misused and not working properly. They can all become aware of their body. And we have to develop this awareness of our body so that it is so good and we can hold it in the back of our awareness in second position. So while we are aware of our body, while we are sensing our body as one organic whole, we can become aware of what our eyes are receiving, the impressions our eyes are receiving, the impressions our ears are receiving, the impressions our nose is receiving, and the impressions our mouth is receiving. Receiving these impressions in the first position, mindfully looking, listening, smelling, and or tasting. Perhaps you can only mindfully look while aware of your body, and you have to work on this to develop this. This is the first conscious shock. The second conscious shock, and this first conscious shock in and of itself has to, and in the moment, it requires us to be using C12 in this proper way. And we're doing this through the sensation of self, through this physical awareness of our body. Part of this, in terms of leaking energy that I've talked about, involves this misuse of C12 through negative emotions, and not just negative emotions. Uspensky stepped on that a little too much. Some negative emotions are important. Some, Mr. Gurdjieff said, have precognitive abilities, but a lot of positive emotions are also tainted with C12. Yeah, I did it. A lot of, if the ego is there, it's misusing C12. And so to begin to realize where our biggest leaks are. And the thing about self-remembering, looking, listening, smelling, tasting with mindful awareness while sensing our body, you will slip in and out of the state many times. And when you step into the state and you become aware and you self-remember, you have just a tiny infinitesimal image of what you were in before you self-remembered. And this is what Mr. Gurdjieff referred to when he said we can take photographs of ourselves in these lower states. So the moment before you were self-remembering, as you self-remember, you can become aware of what you were in that moment before. You can see where you were wasting energy. Was I thinking? Was 70%, 75% of my thoughts, involving imagination, involving wanting to be famous, wanting to do this, wanting to achieve that, wanting to climb the mountain, wanting to write a book, wanting to give a lecture? Or was it in your imagination, your emotional imagination? Were you daydreaming? And daydreaming sort of a mixture of the intellectual center stealing that energy. Was it in negative emotions? Was it in positive emotions? Were you trapped in some kind of physical identification? Was there tension within your body? You know, was there this fossilized expression in the muscles of your face, a look of disgust or distaste, or were you holding your body in a specific way without being aware of it? And when we self-remember, we can take these snapshots and we can begin to see where we're misusing this energy. And the misuse of energy and the leaks are all connected to the misuse of C12, to the abnormal use of C12. So think of what a monk's life would be like. Think of what it would be like to live in a monastery, away from the world, away from distractions, away from outside influences. You live there. Today was like yesterday, which is like tomorrow. Think of what it would have been like 1,000 years ago, before the jet-setting age, before the internet, before communication, because these all disturb our development. They disturb our ability to harness this energy. Imagine if you were a monk 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, living in the middle of a forest, having left your family, left your name, after having taken vows of celibacy. Imagine what your daily routine would be like. And by imagining that, you can begin to think of, then imagine if you were in life, you were in family, you were in the city or in the town. And in the town, in the family, in the city, in your name, all of that, you know, that's where you're misusing that energy. Whereas if you go to the monastic environment, it is structured and created specifically to prevent the misuse of that energy, so you can harness C12 and hopefully begin to transform yourself, because the monks only work at that level. But Mr. Gurdjieff didn't say that transformation with C12 was impossible. It's just not the proper way we are supposed to do it. We're actually supposed to be in the world, in our family, in our life, working on these issues, figuring out where we are leaking these energies. Now, next week, I've still got a big quote from In Search of the Miraculous that talks about this even in greater detail. So this will be continued in a part 3. Think about this, though. Try to bring yourself back to your body. Try to focus and build that muscle, that sensation of self. And then the self-remembering, the mindful looking, listening, smelling, and tasting. And try to do this over and over, and try to take those mental, or not mental pictures, but those pictures, those snapshots of yourself. Try to see yourself the moment before you self-remembered. And try to become aware of the specific ways that you leak energy, because we leak energy in different ways. Some are more emotional, some are more intellectual, some are more physical. At any rate, you know, thank you all for being here. And it's now noon, and now I can shut my computer down. I've got to do another update. I just didn't want to do anything before the meeting, just in case it affected whatever, like it did last week. So goodbye. Thank you all for being here, and take care.
Thanks, Allan.